She didn't scream, she didn't leave a note, she didn't leave a body. In the early hours of a calm Caribbean morning, a young woman vanished from a cruise ship carrying thousands of people, crew, passengers, cameras, routines. When daylight came, she was simply gone. No trace, no confirmation, only questions that refused to settle. This is not a story about what was found. It's about what never appeared and why that absence still haunts the case decades later. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Then stay with us until the end. Morning on a cruise ship is a choreography. Cabin doors open, breakfast lines form, luggage wheels echo down corridors. There is a rhythm to it, predictable enough that absence stands out quickly. And yet, when Amy was first noticed missing, the response moved at the pace of routine, not emergency. That delay would become irreversible. At first, crew members treated the situation as a misplacement, not a disappearance. Announcements were made using her name, calm and casual, the way one calls a lost child at a shopping mall. The assumption persisted she would answer. She never did. By the time the seriousness of the situation crystallized, the ship had already docked. Thousands of passengers began flowing off, each one an untraceable variable. Cameras that might have caught something were overwritten or never reviewed in time. Logs were incomplete. The window of certainty slammed shut quietly, without ceremony. Investigators would later describe this period as the most critical and the most mishandled. One detail loomed larger than the rest: the balcony. The image was irresistible. A young woman sitting alone, the dark water below, a misstep, a fall. It was the explanation that required the least imagination and the least accountability. But falls leave evidence. A sound, a movement, a body recovered or at least spotted. The sea, even when vast, gives something back. Here it gave nothing. Amy was a strong swimmer. She had grown up around water. The sea that morning was calm. If she had fallen accidentally, she would have surfaced. She would have screamed. Someone, anyone, would have noticed. Instead, the ocean remained indifferent. The family pushed back against the narrative of an accidental fall. They asked uncomfortable questions. Why were her shoes still inside? Why were her cigarettes untouched? Why would she step onto the balcony rail barefoot, in the dark, without reason? These weren't emotional objections, they were behavioral ones. People leave patterns when they intend to leave. Amy left none. As the days passed, the investigation widened. Local authorities were contacted. The case crossed jurisdictions, and eventually, the gravity of the situation reached the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That escalation mattered. It meant this was no longer a ship's problem. It was a missing person case with international implications. But jurisdiction at sea is complicated. Cruise ships operate under flags of convenience, registered in countries far from their roots, governed by laws that dilute responsibility. Evidence collection protocols vary. Cooperation is not guaranteed. Accountability disperses into paperwork. By the time the FBI reviewed what was available, much of what mattered was gone. And into that vacuum came the sightings. Months after Amy vanished, reports began to surface. A woman resembling her seen in a Caribbean port, another in a beach bar, then something darker, a claim that she had been spotted with men who controlled her movements, who answered for her, who watched too closely. Each sighting was unverified, each one fragile. But together, they formed a shape that was impossible to ignore: human trafficking. The idea was horrifying and disturbingly plausible. Cruise ships are transient ecosystems. Crew members cycle in and out of ports. Passengers come from everywhere. Background checks, especially in the late 1990s, were inconsistent. Security focused on theft, not people. If someone wanted to move a person unnoticed, this was an ideal environment. The family clung to these reports not because they were comforting, but because they suggested survival. A fate worse than death, perhaps, but not final. Investigators followed the leads. They hit walls. Witnesses recanted. Descriptions blurred. Memories shifted under pressure. And with each passing year, certainty thinned. Skeptics pointed out the lack of physical evidence. no confirmed DNA, no verified photograph, no proof that any sighting was real. Believers pointed out something else. Amy's case refused to close. No body was ever recovered. No definitive explanation ever emerged, and no theory fully explained the details left behind in that cabin: the balcony door, the untouched belongings, the absence of witnesses. This is where psychology replaces evidence. Disappearance without intention suggests interruption. A moment where choice was removed. A brief window where control shifted. If Amy had been taken, it wouldn't have been loud. It would have been social, familiar, someone she didn't fear, someone who didn't trigger alarms in her mind. That's the most unsettling possibility of all. Not force, but trust. Someone offering help, a conversation, a shortcut back to the cabin, a harmless detour. In those moments, danger doesn't announce itself. It blends in. And by the time the ship sailed on, by the time the routine resumed, the opportunity to see clearly was already gone. The sea didn't take Amy. Time did. And time is the one thing investigations can never recover. Cruise ships sell an idea before they sell a destination. Contained luxury, predictable pleasure. Floating cities designed to feel controlled. Safe enough that vigilance softens, that instincts fall asleep. Once you step aboard, responsibility seems outsourced. Someone else is watching, someone else is in charge. That illusion matters. In March of 1998, Amy Lynn Bradley boarded a Caribbean cruise with her family. She was 23, athletic, social, the kind of person who filled space easily, laughing, moving, planning ahead without fear. This was supposed to be a celebration, a pause from routine, a contained adventure. Nothing about Amy suggested risk. No history of running away, no emotional crisis, no secret plan. She wasn't escaping anything, she was enjoying it. And that's the first fracture in this case: disappearance without motive. On the night before she vanished, the ship was alive in its usual way. Music drifting through decks, drinks clinking, strangers becoming temporary friends under artificial stars. Amy spent the evening dancing at the onboard nightclub, socializing with crew members and other passengers. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that would later stand out as a warning sign. When the club closed, Amy returned to the family cabin. She shared it with her parents and younger brother, a tight, ordinary setup that should have made disappearance nearly impossible. There were no arguments, no tension, just exhaustion after a long night. At around 5:30 a.m., Amy's father woke briefly. He saw her asleep on the balcony chair. The door was closed. The ocean was calm. He didn't wake her. He went back to sleep. That moment, quiet, forgettable, would later become unbearable. By 6 a.m., Amy was gone. The balcony was empty, the cabin unchanged. Her shoes were still inside. Her cigarettes and lighter were still there. Her passport, her money, the items you take when you choose to leave, left behind. At first, no one panicked. Cruise ships run on schedules. People wander, sleep late, miss breakfast. The assumption was simple. She must be somewhere on board. But as hours passed, that assumption decayed. Crew announcements went out. Searches began, slowly, methodically, almost reluctantly, because acknowledging the alternative meant accepting something unthinkable, that a person could disappear entirely within a sealed environment. By the time the alarm was taken seriously, the ship had already docked. Passengers had disembarked. Time, critical, unforgiving, had been spent believing in normal explanations. And normal explanations never came. No witnesses reported seeing Amy leave the ship. No confirmed sightings on deck after dawn. No evidence of a fall. No body in the water. No disturbance in the cabin. She hadn't checked out of safety systems. She hadn't triggered alarms. She hadn't been recorded leaving. In an environment designed to account for everyone, she slipped through. That's when the story stopped being about a missing woman and became about a system failure. Cruise ships are paradoxes. They are massive yet intimate, public yet private, designed to entertain while quietly monitoring movement, cameras in corridors, crew everywhere, access points controlled. And yet, In 1998, those systems were fragmented, surveillance was limited, record-keeping uneven. Security practices built more for customer comfort than forensic accountability. The ship conducted its own initial investigation, but ships are not neutral spaces. They are businesses, floating jurisdictions with incentives to minimize disruption. By the time authorities were fully involved, the ocean had already erased possibilities. Amy's family refused to accept the easiest explanation, that she fell overboard, because nothing about her behavior suggested despair. Nothing suggested recklessness, and statistically, accidental falls leave patterns, witnesses, sounds, something. Here, there was nothing, and nothing is the most dangerous clue of all, because nothing allows every theory to breathe. Accident, abduction, human trafficking, voluntary disappearance. Each possibility feeds on the absence of proof, growing louder as certainty dissolves. But before any theory can be examined, one question hangs in the air. How does a person vanish without friction? Not violently, not dramatically, but quietly, between routine and sunrise. That silence is where this case lives, and it's only the beginning. Every disappearance has a circle of proximity, not suspects, not villains, at least not at first, just people who were close enough to matter, people whose presence felt ordinary at the time. In Amy's case, that circle was unusually fluid, constantly shifting as the ship moved from port to port, and that's where certainty began to dissolve. In the days after Amy vanished, attention quietly turned inward, toward the crew, not because of evidence, but because of access. Crew members moved freely through the ship at all hours. They knew the layout, the blind spots, the routines. They worked while passengers slept. Several witnesses later recalled seeing Amy socializing with crew members the night she disappeared. Conversations, laughing, dancing, nothing inappropriate, nothing alarming, but disappearances rarely announce their turning point. The cruise line, Royal Caribbean International, maintained that there was no proof of foul play. Their position was consistent, controlled, legally cautious. From their perspective, the most plausible explanation remained an accidental fall. From the family's perspective, that explanation felt less like a conclusion and more like a refusal to look further. Because what no one wanted to say out loud was this: cruise ships are designed to keep guests comfortable, not accountable. The systems that track money, meals, and entertainment are far more precise than those that track human vulnerability. In 1998, surveillance cameras did not blanket every corridor. Access logs were inconsistent. Crew oversight varied by department and nationality. Background checks were often outsourced, minimal, or non-existent. That wasn't negligence. It was normal, and normal is where danger hides best. Investigators examined the possibility that Amy left her cabin voluntarily that morning. Maybe she couldn't sleep. Maybe she went to get air. Maybe she planned to meet someone briefly. That scenario requires only one thing: trust. No force, no struggle, just familiarity. Someone she recognized. Someone who didn't trigger fear. Someone who seemed safe in that liminal space between night and morning. Psychologically, that matters. Humans are most vulnerable when transitioning between sleep and wakefulness, between private and public, between solitude and company. Judgment is slower. Boundaries are softer. If Amy stepped out onto the deck, it wouldn't have felt dangerous. The ship was quiet. The sun was coming up. Crew members would have been starting their shifts. Nothing about that environment signals threat. And yet, that's exactly what makes it ideal. The investigation attempted to reconstruct movement patterns: who was on duty, who had access to which areas, who disembarked at the next port. But the ship had already moved on. Crew contracts rotated, records blurred. Some individuals were questioned briefly. None were charged, no one confessed. And without physical evidence, suspicion remained just that: suspicion. Years later, a photograph surfaced. It appeared to show a woman strongly resembling Amy, standing on a beach in the Caribbean, flanked by men. Her posture was stiff, her expression unreadable. The image was grainy, unofficial, impossible to authenticate. For the family, it was devastating. Hope and fear collided in a single frame. Experts examined the photo. Opinions split. Some saw resemblance, others saw projection. Human beings are wired to find patterns, especially when the alternative is acceptance of loss. Another report came from a former Navy officer who claimed he encountered a woman in a Caribbean brothel who identified herself as Amy. According to his account, she was under control, unable to leave, her movements monitored. Again, no proof followed. Skeptics dismissed these claims as myth-making, trauma-creating stories where evidence failed. But trauma doesn't invent specifics easily. It amplifies what already feels plausible. And the uncomfortable truth is this: international waters have always been vulnerable to exploitation. Jurisdiction gaps, economic desperation, transient populations, all ingredients for crimes that thrive on invisibility. If Amy had been taken, it wouldn't have required a large conspiracy, only one moment, one person, one decision not to be seen. That's what makes this case endure, not the complexity, but the simplicity. No dramatic struggle, no obvious villain, just a brief overlap between opportunity and trust. The ship sailed on, the ports blurred together, and Amy became something else, not a passenger, not even a missing person. She became a question about systems designed for pleasure, not protection, a question about how safety is marketed, not enforced, a question about how easily a life can slip between protocols, and most of all, a question that refuses to close. If this could happen here, where everything is controlled, where else is it happening quietly, without witnesses? When evidence disappears, stories take its place. Not fantasies, but frameworks, human attempts to impose order on chaos. In Amy's case, theories didn't just emerge, they hardened. Each one filling the gaps left by silence, each one shaped by what people needed the truth to be. The first theory, accidental fall, was also the most convenient. It required no suspect, no confrontation, no institutional failure. The sea, after all, doesn't answer questions, it absorbs them. For cruise lines and authorities alike, this explanation offered closure without consequence. But psychology resists convenience. Accidental falls are not invisible events. Even in vast oceans, they leave ripples, witnesses, sounds, reactions, and they almost always involve context, intoxication, recklessness, isolation, despair. Amy's behavior didn't align. She wasn't alone in the world. She wasn't planning an ending. She was mid-conversation with life, future plans, family bonds, routines waiting back home. The night she disappeared was unremarkable in every way that matters, and unremarkable nights do not usually end in vanishing. The second theory, voluntary disappearance, was quieter, almost insulting in its implication, that she chose to leave her family without a word, that she abandoned her identity, her history, her body. This theory ignores something fundamental. Disappearing is hard. It requires preparation, money, documents, intent. Amy left all of that behind. People who run don't do it barefoot, without ID, into international uncertainty. The third theory, abduction, was the one no one wanted to say too loudly, because once spoken, it demanded uncomfortable accountability. Abduction doesn't need violence if trust is present. It needs timing, access, a setting where help is far away and authority is diffuse. A cruise ship provides all three. Critics argue there is no proof of force, no witnesses to a struggle. But that's the point. Successful crimes are quiet. They blend into routine. They exploit the spaces where no one is looking because everyone assumes someone else is. And then there's the final theory, the one that lingers like a bruise you keep touching, that Amy is alive. Sightings persisted over the years, different islands, different contexts, each report independently weak but collectively persistent. Always the same details: control, fear, restricted movement, men answering for her. Human trafficking is difficult to prove precisely because it erases autonomy slowly. Victims don't disappear in one moment. They are dismantled over time. Names replaced, movement controlled, identity diluted. In the late 1990s, awareness of these networks was limited. Cruise lines were not trained to identify trafficking indicators. Law enforcement coordination across borders was fragmented, and victims without documents are almost impossible to trace. If Amy entered that world, she would have vanished, not because no one looked, but because no one knew how to see. Years passed, technology advanced, DNA databases expanded, facial recognition improved, and still, nothing definitive surfaced. The family lived in limbo. Hope became something heavy, not a comfort, but a responsibility, to keep searching, to keep believing, to keep her name active in a system that quietly prefers closed files. This is the cruelty of unresolved cases. They don't end, they echo. Every new development reignited attention. Every documentary reopened wounds. Every rumor forced a recalculation of grief. Is it better to mourn or to wait? Psychologically, ambiguity is one of the most painful states a human can endure. The brain craves endings, even tragic ones, especially tragic ones. But Amy's case offers no ending, only a horizon. And perhaps that is why it refuses to fade, because beneath the theories is a deeper discomfort, one that has nothing to do with Amy specifically, and everything to do with us. If a person can vanish in a place designed to monitor, entertain, and control, if systems can fail so completely without consequence, if responsibility can dissolve across borders and policies, then safety itself is fragile, not broken, just conditional, and the conditions are not always visible. There is a specific kind of grief reserved for the unresolved. It doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. It waits. It lingers in ordinary moments. Holidays, phone calls, empty chairs. It asks the same question over and over, never changing its tone, never accepting silence as an answer. Where are you? For Amy's family, time did not heal. It rearranged the pain. Every year that passed without answers added weight to the absence, not just the absence of Amy, but the absence of accountability, of certainty, of truth. They learned to live in a permanent in-between, where hope and mourning existed at the same time. Psychologically, this state is brutal. Closure allows grief to settle. Ambiguity keeps it awake. The mind replays moments endlessly, searching for missed signals. A glance, a decision, a pause that might have changed everything. Amy's father waking up and seeing her on the balcony. The door closed, the calm sea, a memory frozen in unbearable clarity. Because in retrospect, every ordinary moment becomes a potential turning point. Investigations eventually slow, leads dry up, files age, the world moves on, but families don't. They remain stuck at the moment the phone stopped ringing with answers. What makes Amy's case particularly haunting is not just that she disappeared, but how easily it happened. No alarms sounded, no systems activated in time, no single failure dramatic enough to demand reform. Instead, it was a quiet accumulation of small delays, small assumptions, small gaps in responsibility, and those are the hardest to confront, because they implicate everyone and no one at once. Cruise ships continue to sail, technology has improved, protocols have evolved, but the core truth remains uncomfortable. Environments designed for pleasure are often the least prepared for crisis. Security that is invisible feels comforting until it's needed. Amy's disappearance forced a question that still hasn't been fully answered. How many safeguards exist only in theory? Because the most dangerous failures are not malicious. They are procedural, normalized, accepted because nothing bad has happened yet, until it does. The absence of a body became more than a detail. It became symbolic, a refusal of the universe to confirm a narrative, a reminder that some stories do not resolve neatly, no matter how much time passes. And so Amy exists now in a strange space, between memory and possibility, between past and present, between life and death. She is not a headline, not a statistic, not a lesson neatly summarized. She is a question still moving through the world, a question about trust, about safety, about how easily a person can become invisible when systems prioritize routine over vigilance. And perhaps that is the final, unsettling truth of this case. Amy didn't disappear because no one cared. She disappeared because everything looked normal, and normal is where we stop paying attention. Some mysteries remain unsolved, not because the truth is unreachable, but because it slipped away during moments we didn't think mattered. Amy Lynn Bradley's case endures because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Disappearance doesn't always come with chaos. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in routine, protected by assumptions. If this story unsettled you, it should, because the warning signs here weren't screams or alarms. They were delays, blind spots, trust placed in systems that were never designed to protect against the unthinkable. If you believe cases like this deserve continued attention, if you believe silence is the most dangerous outcome, subscribe to Killer Mind, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and stay with us for the next story, where normality once again hides something far darker than it appears.